Hello and welcome to the Aquarius Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Reed. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by Aquarium Co-op. And for this episode, let's talk about the Aquarium Co-op coarse sponge filter. Let's talk about a couple features here of what make this sponge filter awesome and what I wish when I had built my fish room. I wish I was already a co-op employee. I wish we'd already kind of gone through the motions, or when I say motions, I mean like a year of development going back and forth with the manufacturer on this one. But I wish this thing was available so I wouldn't have had to have bought like a 12 pack of generic sponge filters on Amazon and all the challenges that came with that. So feature number one, the coarse sponge material. So we're using a 20 ppi across the line. So that's 20 pores per inch. And what that means compared to normal sponge filters are going to be about 40 to 50 ppi. So there's going to be a lot more density. There's going to be a lot more, many more pores per inch in the generic or the other brand sponge filters. Now, having fewer pores makes it a coarser material. And there's two really cool things about that. The first being, and honestly one of my favorite features, is the instant sink. All right. Now, if you've ever set up a sponge filter, or if you set up a lot of sponge filters, more often than not, you will actually have some trouble getting the sponge filter to sink. So they all have a weighted base, but sometimes that base is not heavy enough to initially sink a larger size sponge filter that has a very, very high pore density. So this sounds like, oh, that sounds like a mild annoyance, but could actually lead to your tank splurting water out, your sponge filter not sinking to the bottom. Right? It's floating. There's so much air trapped in there. The sponge is actually driving. Or the air pump is actually still driving, so it's forcing air into the sponge filter. Water's coming up the uplift tube, and some of it, if you don't have a lid on your tank, can actually go outside of the tank. So having a sponge filter that's going to sink to the bottom is convenient, but it's also a feature that's going to help keep water off of your tank, off of your floor, off of your stand. And so you're saying, well, why don't you just catch it and make it so that it doesn't happen? Squeeze the sponge, it'll sink to the bottom. Well, guess what? You can do that when you're present in the fish room, but when you leave, I have gone back to the fish room numerous times and I've had sponge filters all the way up at the top that were sunk the entire time I was in the fish room the night before, right? So that is just a thing that happens. The second awesome thing about a coarser sponge is that, in my opinion, less maintenance, right? So it's not as fine. It's not going to trap gunk nearly as fast as a higher density sponge filter will, and so that means you don't have to go in there and squeeze it out as nearly as often. Now, I'm not going to lie, in some tanks I actually have never serviced my sponge filters, and other tanks I have, right? So depending on the bio load, but that's something nice to have, that it's not going to get clogged up nearly as fast. And that's not to say you shouldn't maintain your sponge filters, but you shouldn't have to maintain them nearly as often. And then another awesome feature about this is that you can actually use an air stone inside the body of the sponge filter. So instead of just having the air tube going down the uplift tube and just having straight bubbles coming out of an air tube through the uplift, right? So that's going to cause your suction. That's where you're going to get the flow in the sponge filter. You can actually pair this up with this air stone, and you will get great control over your bubbles. You can make really, really fine bubbles. And I'm no scientist, right? But finer bubbles, more bubbles, it's going to help to draw in more air so you get more circulation. And again, with this air stone, you can control that. You can have different amounts of stack of fabric in the air stone, so you can really, really fine tune it. So the combination of air stone with Aquarium Co-op sponge filter is just a match made in heaven. So I hope you enjoyed that little spiel. There's still other features about this sponge filter, like the fact that the base, the cap, and the uplift tube are green. It's going to do so much of a better job hiding algae. You can see that in the fish room tour of my fish room on the Aquarium Co-op YouTube channel, where one tank has a clear uplift tube, and you can clearly see that the algae growing on it, which in my fish room, not that big of a deal, but from an aesthetic perspective, if somebody is concerned about that, having green bases, having a green uplift tube is going to help to hide that algae. So many, many features in this. We took the basically the standard run-of-the-mill sponge filter, and we put 3 or 4 tweaks on this thing to make it so, just to make it from like kind of an A minus, B plus kind of product to being an A plus product. So again, Aquarium Co-op sponge filters, go check it out, aquariumcoop.com. Now, on to the interview. Today's date is Thursday, March 26th, 2020. My guest today is Dr. Ted Coletti. Ted has over 30 years of experience in the hobby and has developed a passion for livebearers, not only to work with in the present, but also about their history. He also specializes in container ponds and water gardening. Dr. Coletti is an active speaker on the East Coast and at NEC conventions. In addition, he's also written numerous articles appearing in Tropical Fish Hobbyist magazine and has his own books, Aquarium Care of Live Bearing Fish, and his recent book, The Tub Pond Handbook, available on Amazon. Ted also takes an active role in helping to run clubs and organizations such as the American Livebearer Association, founding the Aquarium Hobby Historical Society, Skylands Aquarium Water Garden Group, and sitting on the board of the NEC. So, Ted, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Randy. How are you doing during this time?
I am doing. I'm doing pretty
You're
well.
surviving? Okay.
I'm surviving. I definitely live in the epicenter of coronavirus, unfortunately, here in the on the east side Seattle area of Washington State. But
Okay.
I'm staying healthy. My family's staying healthy. Our business Aquarium Co-op, we're still running. We are considered an essential business to make sure we get
Oh yeah.
food for fish. You don't want your pets to have to suffer as well during this time period. But
I
we're
enjoyed your booth at the Aquatic Experience last November
oh nice. We're the one.
and the Aquarium Co-op, yeah.
Were we giving anything away at that one?
You were giving away that wonderful krill flake food
Ah, yes, yes.
that was very popular. The line went all the way down for that one, and you guys were very friendly and answering a lot of questions. So thanks for coming to that event. That's a really great event because I think the aquatic experience brings vendors, fish clubs, and people who we call unclubbed all together in one place. So,
Yeah, you did hear the unfortunate news though that they're actually discontinuing the aquatic experience.
oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah.
a shame.
Yeah, so two-time guest on the podcast, Zach Frank, he was working for World Pet Association.
Really?
That was one of the things that he was really championing, and unfortunately,
Ah,
they just did the 2 years in Secaucus, and the World Pet Association decided that they didn't want to continue it, and they were actually going to put a little bit more emphasis on America's Pet Family Expo in Southern California. So no more aquatic experience, and Zach has actually moved on to work for Sarah North America.
okay, yeah, yeah. Sarah's a very good company too, a German company. Yeah, that's a real shame because I think when you lump the aquarium hobby in with pets, you know, they're really not pets. I know some people get an affection towards a goldfish or a koi or maybe an old big cichlid, but it's really a hobby of applied scientists as well as artists, right? It's some people who like to breed fish, some people who like to do the art, create the aquascaping, rather than pet keeping. So that I think is a misstep on the World Pet Association, but hopefully maybe the Florida Fish Farm Association will bring this back someday.
Yeah, hopefully. And if there is actually a little bit of a newer event that sprung up when the aquatic experience left Chicago. So Aquashella, a couple good friends of mine started Aquashella in Chicago. They also have it in Dallas, and so
Right.
it's a little bit more of a youthful take.
It's
Not
more of a marine hobby though, right?
It's actually they try to really split it down the middle.
Yeah.
There's inherently, I think inherently there is a little bit more of the culture from the saltwater side of things,
Yeah.
but they're doing their best to try to have freshwater represented as much as possible.
Yeah.
They had aquascaping competitions, they've had
Right.
flower horns and bettas, and so it will be very interesting to see where that goes. Unfortunately, with everything going on right now, that's actually being pushed from I think July into
You're right.
October right now.
And
But
people also don't realize there has long been aquarium weekend events going on even before these two events happened. The Keystone Clash in Pennsylvania, the Northeast Council convention every spring, all the specialty clubs, the Cichlid, the American Cichlid, the American Library, they all have special weekend events. The Great Lakes in the Midwest always have events. So there are always these weekend events that generally have speakers, auctions, and fish shows that people can go to. And I think just there's just a lack of knowledge about them. And sometimes some of the YouTube channels and I think some of the other people who do things don't know about these other events because the organized side of the hobby has been around for over 100 years, but we've never done a good job of letting people know that we exist.
yeah,
so,
yeah, I was,
um,
while you're saying
so
that's one of the
yeah,
things where like Aquashella, they've done a really good job. They got on a couple of morning talk shows. So they were on a morning Dallas
right.
show, they were on a morning Chicago show, and so that way the public gets to know them. But to exactly to your point, I don't think the fish nerds, the fish clubs, have that same acumen when it comes to marketing and
No,
reaching the public.
No, I mean, one of my specialties in the organized hobby is how to market fish club events. But real hardcore freshwater fish hobbyists, I don't think that's in their core of personality. But if you're a real freshwater hobbyist, that's the places to go. You know, the convention of the Aquatic Gardeners Association, the Keystone Clash, the NEC convention, any of the various shows and events that go on throughout the Midwest, that's really where you get the real hardcore freshwater people breeding fish. That's where you're going to acquire lots of rare fish because they always have an auction, multiple auctions. They have vendors. And, you know, it doesn't take much more than a Google search to really find these events. The NEC convention, which has been around for over 40 years, has also been canceled, unfortunately. That takes place every April in Connecticut. You know, brings hobbyists from all over the U.S. and Canada. Keystone Clash will be in September in Pennsylvania. That's created by three clubs. They, you know, right now that hasn't been canceled, so that's another place to look. But there are opportunities there, and I always tell all of the people who are listening to your podcast, try to join a live fish club. Um, because there's nothing like both the fellowship you get with other hobbyists and being able to acquire a lot of rare species and the knowledge from the people in those clubs. I just formed my own club recently. It's been a lifelong dream. There's a lot of ways to form your own club as well. But it's such an advantage over just doing social media to really meet people and get the livestock and plants that you really want to see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm a huge proponent of the fish club scene. Right now, family commitments make it a little difficult for me to attend
Oh, yeah,
my
sure.
yeah, they make it difficult for me to attend my Greater Seattle Aquarium Society meetings. But it is.
That's a really great club, yeah.
Have you had a chance to come out and speak?
No, I know several people in that club and
We got to
and
get you
over the
out.
years. Oh, be happy to. I've always liked to visit the Pacific Northwest. I've known several people in that club. That club has a long history serving the hobby. So yeah.
Yeah, I've got the ear of the speaker chair, and you know I like to say I've got a couple notches on my belt of past podcast guests that we've actually
Oh, okay.
through my recommendation, actually we've gotten them up to the club to speak. So and I mean, if you're willing to travel, so our mutual friend Joe Ferdenzi, I'm like, Joe, you should come out, and Joe's like, no, I don't fly. So
Joe doesn't fly.
might be
Yeah.
hard to get Joe across the country. But Ted, if you're interested, man, you've got you know the speaker lineup that you have. So I think what's really fun is when I do speaker research, especially if they've ever spoken or are associated with the NEC. The NEC speaker profile page lists the various talks that they
Yeah.
give, and your talks all sound very interesting. From Swordtails, which we'll dive in today, but your more recent passion of water gardening and you know these aquatic
Hmm.
container ponds and whatnot. So yeah, I'll definitely talk with the speaker chair, and once all of this you know self quarantine and we get a handle on COVID-19 in this country and we can kind of return back to normalcy, you know, definitely make sure that Ted Coletti, that your name is high up on that list of people we can bring out.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Yeah, so let's dive into the origin section of who Dr. Ted Coletti is and how did you get your start in this hobby with tropical fish?
Well, I think I really got my start right after college. Because what happened was I had an apartment. We had an aquarium growing up as a child that I always remembered, and just started to want to get a tank for the apartment. And what happens with a lot of us hobbyists, that led to more tanks and more tanks and more tanks, and then eventually more tanks than I really should be allowed to have. you know, so to speak. Uh, that was in the early to mid 1980s.
And what
Um,
species did you find yourself kind of gravitating towards? Were you just
and I'm
kind of a
sharing my screen with you now too, by the
Mhm.
way. I don't know whether you see that there.
This is
Um,
this is a first for the podcast. We actually have Dr. Ted, you are we are doing a visual, you know, kind of FaceTime, if you will, through StreamYards, and you're going to share your screen. We're going to walk through this. And so I'm going to do my best to make sure that we are providing some good descriptions of what we're seeing right
Right.
now. So this is going to be a first in like 76 episodes. I've never done this. So,
Sure. Well, I mean, I mean, I've kind of evolved my hobby over the years to lots of different things, So, in the 90s, I started doing biotope aquariums. I was just a biotope aquarium nut. That was, pre-internet. So I would have to write academics and explorers and look at their journal articles and ask for photos. Look through old aquarium books because before there was YouTube, the book and magazine were kind of the influencers
oh,
back
yeah.
then. That's where everyone got all their information. So you got pictures of somewhat of and there were a few books on that too. So I would do things like take tree trunks and put them in an aquarium to try to simulate an Amazon tank. So I was doing a lot of aquascaping and live planting back then. That was during the old CompuServe fishnet days, the early days of the internet. Then I moved on to Livebearers in the late 90s for about 20 years or so. But during that time, ever since the late 90s, I've been bringing my fish outside for the summer. I really tear down my whole fish room. So right now, I'm showing you a picture of what my fish room looks like, and the other tanks that are in my house. And I put the fish outside because I find they're easier to breed. There's a lot of live foods available. Always had an interest in the history of the hobby too. So around 2002, I formed the Aquarium Hobby Historical Society of America, and that's where we've had a lot of the legends in the hobby who, fortunately, were still with us. Communicate first on Yahoo groups, and now we're on Facebook and Groups.io, just to try to record an accurate history of what the hobby is, because there's a lot of misconceptions. And how did this hobby evolve to where we are now? And it's a really interesting story about some of the personalities and how certain fish like swordtails came into the hobby. So I'm pretty eclectic, and like you said, involved in the fish club scenes all around the country, and just formed my own club last May here in the northwest part of New Jersey.
There's a lot to unpack there. What would you say? So, I guess the image first. We can talk about the image that we were looking at, and just to let people know, like the fish room picture that you were showing me, very aesthetically pleasing. Many of your tanks appear to be fully planted with driftwood. Just look like really awesome. For lack of a better word, like a display tank, like a main living room,
Right.
front room kind of display tank. Very, very beautiful. Let's see, what else do you have go? So you've got a rack off to one wall. Looks like 4 tiers. Yeah, it looks really
Hmm.
cool. And so right here, we're looking at about what, 4, 16, 17, 18, like maybe 19 tanks in this tank or in this picture?
Yeah, yeah, about 20 tanks in this little man cave, some show tanks upstairs, and then nearly everything goes outside in the summer, to about 24 to 36 tub ponds,
Mm hmm.
where I do, a lot of my fish breeding.
Mm hmm. And what does that process look like for you? I know the main meat and potatoes of this talk today is going to be on swordtails, but when you do your move, winter's passing, it's starting to warm up, springtime. How long does it take you to take those 20, the inhabitants of maybe all 20 tanks or just some of the tanks and move them and transition them to outside?
I do it, I set up the tubs, early, right? Usually around April, and I put out a lot of the plants. So in April, the plants start to go out, and then the fish start going out where I am. I'm here in zone 6 in around June.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fish then will all go out. The tub is already set up. The fish will stay out there till about October 1st, and then I'll bring them inside and bring them in the fish room and acclimate them slowly. Usually there's a lot of fry. I usually do a lot of my egg scatterer breeding outdoors, just because it's easier. And there's a lot of cues with Mother Nature to let fish breed and do well. Just the size of the fish, the colors, their health is just amazing when you put your fish outside. And I recommend anyone who has even a sunny window or a patio or even a backyard consider doing it.
And then the other picture we're looking at right now looks like on your deck, or at least one of the decks to your home, we've got three, what are they, about 25, 30 gallon round tubs, like fully planted up
Yeah,
lilies. And what other plants would we be looking at? Like fully stocked. There's probably only maybe 5% of that entire surface area is actually visible water, right? Very beautiful looking.
right, right. Yeah, I would say that's true. Usually you have a water lily somewhere in the middle. You have vegetative filters. I don't use any filters except live plants, irises, cattails. They filter the water. They form a little feeding ground for the fish. So it's as natural a setting as you can do.
And are you aerating?
Um,
Are you aerating these guys?
no,
No? Okay.
absolutely not.
Okay.
No, no, absolutely not. I mean, my book, the Tub Pond Handbook, goes into, with 150 pages and all these photos, how to choose a tub that's appropriate for your fish. Most importantly, where to put the tub or the container pond in terms of sun and temperature, the type of plants that you need to use, and things like that. But swordtails, which is the topic today, and platies, the whole Zophophorus genus, does great outside because they're Central American fish. They can take extremely cold temperatures, much colder than in the fish room. The fish seem to adjust to the changing temperatures outside better than they do in your aquarium, which is more of a laboratory type of deal.
Hmm.
Give you an example, Randy. I pulled in red swordtails out of a pond in my backyard last year. The temperature was in the 40s.
Oh, wow.
Now that was the absolute coldest that they could possibly go, and they looked a little worse for wear when I pulled them out. I pulled them out late because they were frying there, and they grow so fast outdoors. I missed them when I pulled all the fish out a month earlier. But fish do extremely hardy, and the swordtails and platies in particular are fairly very hardy fish.
Are you getting enough, insects, visiting these ponds, going into the water for fish to eat that you're not
Oh,
supplementing
heck
with
yeah.
additional? So are you even feeding any additional fish food?
I do feed additional fish food
Okay.
because I want the fish to breed and do well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the neat thing is if I go on vacation, if you're away for 2 weeks, your fish will be fine. You don't have to feed them.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of feeding them is to get them robust enough to breed and to have enough food for the fry. And your fish just do better with a more balanced diet. But it's supplemented by all the live algae, the live microorganisms, the Daphnia, the mosquito larvae, other insect larvae, and they're in various sizes, right? So when your fish hatch out, there's microscopic food for them to eat, but as they grow, there's larger foods too. So that's another benefit of putting your fish outside.
What I see here, and what the parallel that I'm drawing right now is, so for anybody that wants to expand their fish collection, wants to do ponds outside, this is probably the easiest, best way to get your significant other who may not want you to expand outside of the house or outside of your fish room, because what you have set
Right.
up here is absolutely beautiful. Like this looks like you would pay, your boutique high-end nursery to come to your home and set up these tubs. Like all three that you had in the image and the one that we're focusing on now, these are gorgeous. The fact that you even have fish in there is just like even more icing on the cake. These things are awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks very much. Yeah, I mean, there's an old saying from Greg Speakert, who was sort of the water gardener plant guru before he unfortunately passed away suddenly about 15 years ago. He said, "Water gardening is gardening for the gardening impaired. You cannot fail." And it's in many ways that's really true. I'm planting most of my plants in just plain pea gravel with mesh baskets. The water that the roots grow out of the mesh basket, they clean the water. Unlike a house plant, you can't underwater it, you can't overwater it. You just got to keep it a little moist. It's fairly easy gardening to do. And there's a lot of vendors both online and also nurseries probably within a driving distance of you that will sell you pond plants. So my book, the Tub Pond Handbook, which is available on Amazon, goes into how to select your plants, what plants are best, how to do some of the aquascaping. But it's fairly easy to do, and you can do it in a really small space. I like it better than a dug-in pond, Randy, because with a dug-in pond, I can't get up close, right? I can't get up close and see the fishes.
Mm-hmm.
I can't smell the water lilies. I can't taste the nectar. I can't see the insects. I can't get a close look. In-ground ponds are nice, they're beautiful, but they're to be appreciated from afar. And that's why we keep large fish like goldfish and koi. You keep tropical fish outside in a tub pond, you can get right up close and see behavior you won't see in your aquarium. Because remember, your fish, when you see them behave in an aquarium, they're behaving because they see you. They think they're going to be fed. So you never really see, unless you put, and I recommend people do this, a hidden camera on your fish tank and observe them, you will never see their true behavior. But when you're outside, you're getting a bird's eye view and you get a different impression of them because they can't sense that you're there, right? The eyes are on the sides of their heads.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a neat thing to do,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
it's the thing I look forward to most in my hobby.
yeah, I mean, this. I actually have one of these tubs that's empty right now on the side of the house, like the perfect size plastic 25-ish gallon tub that I think some guppies in my fish room are probably gonna have to take a little trip out in one of these when it starts to warm up. So on that note, and I'm sure your book covers this, and so I will have links, Amazon links to your book. I definitely appreciate you coming on. I want to make sure that anybody listening to this that's interested in water gardening and taking their fish from their fish room out for the spring and summertime season can definitely have that link to go to. But is there like a rule of thumb, right, as far as you know, depending on where you live in the country, what is like the low or high temperature average that we're looking for to
Yeah.
kind of trigger to know like, okay, your lows don't get any lower than 50, boom, you can go ahead and start. Or
Well, really, I mean, the most important thing is that the temper though you have don't go by air temperatures. Like if you hear the forecast, they get a floating thermometer and check your water temps. A tub that is set up in the sun will really warm up even higher than the air temps, right? So when you get a weather forecast, most people don't realize that temperature is is the temperature, the high temperature of that day in the shade,
hmm,
right? In the sun, the average daily high is much higher, and that's what's going to be hitting your water and warming it up. So a floating thermometer, what you want to look for is you want to have the water in your aquarium or your fish room be close to the temperature outside. That's when you put the fish out. So I don't keep my fish room or my tanks really warm. I keep my fish in my tanks, unless I want to breed my fish, I keep them in the low 70s because my fish live longer. There's less chance of disease, especially with some of the flexibacterias. And so I keep them in the low 70s. And when my tubs hit that low 70, and I know it's going to be that way for a couple of days, that's when I put the fish out. So where I am in zone 6, which is the planting zone, if you can go to the U.S. Department of Agriculture on and you will see where your zone is. New Jersey, parts of the Midwest, we're zone 6. For me, that's around Labor Day is when I drain my tubs. After I've set them up a month before, I put in new water, and I will add fish in early June.
hmm,
That's generally works for me. But again, there's some fish that like it colder. Platies and swordtails, paradise fish, most barbs, you can keep them in your aquarium in the low 60s, they're fine. And that's when I'll know to put them outside. Once they're outside, they adjust to temperature changes great. So they can stay out long. It's that you just want to make sure when you put them out, your temperatures are somewhat similar.
no, that's good. That's good advice. And of course, all of this probably very, very well detailed in the book that could walk a complete noob like me through the process and be successful of transitioning fish, getting the right species of plants, positioning where you're going to put this thing. So,
Right.
yeah, that's good stuff. And so, on the note of swordtails, let's jump into that meat and potatoes topic. And
Sure.
so, you're saying so in the '90s you got yourself into live bearers, right?
Right.
Okay,
Correct.
I guess so. The first question would be what got you into live bearers first off?
Well, I mean, I was, when I was a child, we always had a tank with, mollies and platies and angelfish and other things. But my first tank I ever got on my own, like, when I was just started college, I bought a bunch of, I think they were platies, which are my favorite fish just for sentimental reasons. And woke up one morning, came out, you see all the babies in the tank. You never really forget that. And so, um, platies and swordtails genetically are extremely interesting animals. They're a little more recently evolved than some of the other freshwater fish species we keep. They're mostly seen as bread and butter fish. Fish that, everyone knows that they're easy to keep, you start with, but they're actually quite interested in their behavior and their evolution. And they've become real popular starting around 2000 when my friend Rusty Wessel of the American Cichlid Association started bringing them back from Mexico and bringing back some really fabulous species we haven't seen in a very long time, such as the Montezuma swordtail. And that really kicked off a really big, I think, almost gold rush with people wanting to keep these fish. Um, there's a whole stock center down in Texas called the Saphophorus Genetic Stock Center. They've been using these fish for cancer research since the early 1930s. They keep almost every known species. I've gotten some animals from there and distributed them out um, in the early O's. So there's just a lot of interest about these fish and a lot more things to like about them than just bread and butter fish, Randy.
Is there any reason why they haven't split that genus? Why both a platy and a swordtail are both in the same
Oh,
genus, and
yeah.
we've got such a significant, physical difference with a swordtail versus the platy?
Well, right now, your viewers, to let you know, I'm showing Randy a map of where the platies and swordtails come from, which is essentially Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras. And you'll
All along the
see.
Atlantic and Gulf portion for the
Right,
most part.
right, all
Yeah.
the Atlantic Gulf. And there's platies and swordtails within this whole range, right? So geographically, they're not really separated.
Hmm.
The platies tend to stay more in the banky areas where there's a lot of brush. The swordtails are more in open water, but the reason is because they will readily interbreed. And the sword itself is a genetic part of this genus. Over evolution, these species have lost and regained a swordtail to
Interesting.
the point where if there was a study done, they pasted a cardboard sword onto a male platyfish, and the females preferred that platy male to the regular platy males. So the sword has just this instinctual characteristic that the females enjoy. So size does matter, guys. It seems, at least with platies and swordtails. So, and genetically, they're not really that different. I mean, you can see here, I'm showing you now just where the platies and swordtails range. So if they do it, they've done so much DNA analysis on these fish, they can put them in clusters, right? They're biochemical clusters, what their DNA looks like. And if you see here, you see these clusters of fish, and some are swordtails and some look like platies, and they're in similar clusters.
So we just happened to this snapshot in time of this last, let's say, 200 years that man has been interested in the platies and swordtails, and we start looking at them in depth. Um, it's just a factor of time that these particular species have a sword to them. Where if we fast
Yes.
forwarded 500 years, the ones with swords may have lost them, and the platies without may have gained a sword tail.
Yeah, I mean, we think these fish evolved about a million years ago,
Hmm.
is the current thinking. But they've lost and regained their sword over time. There's one fish in particular here. called Zophophorus clemensiae. And Zophophorus clemensiae, for all intents and purposes, looks like a swordtail. And it's up on your screen now, uh, Randy. It has a sword. It has the stripes on the side of the body. So we thought this evolved from a regular swordtail. What we found out was what Zophophorus clemensiae really is. It is a natural hybrid between a platyfish, an ancient platyfish, and an ancient Hellerii swordtail. Because when you do the genetics, it doesn't fall into the swordtail class. Its mother was a platy, and they
Wow.
know that because if you do the mitochondria DNA, that's always inherited from the mother.
Wow.
So looks can be deceiving. In fact, all of the color varieties of platies and swordtails that are in the pet shops now, and when you and I were both kids, for the past 100 years, they're all hybrids. You cannot go to a pet shop and buy a platy and a swordtail and say that that's a platy, Zophophorus um, maculatus, or Zophophorus hellerii. They've all been purposely interbred for different colors and finishes and shapes, and then morphed into an idealized version of what a platy should look like. That little squat little fish,
Mm-hmm.
or an idealized version of what a swordtail look like. But intense, there, anytime you buy a platy or swordtail in retail, consider that to be a hybrid fish
Mm.
between any one of four different species. Maculatus, variatus, hellerii, Zophidium is probably in there from back in the 50s. Um, so again, looks can be deceiving.
Yeah, what's actually really cool about you pulling up this Clemencier, unless I'm butchering that name, I like to do some prep before every interview,
Right.
and I actually read your article from TFH from March 2007, just talking about the Clemencier contradiction. Has this orphan swordtail finally found a home? And that was actually really fun. That was a very fun read, and about how
Yeah.
that's a challenging fish for some, but you had found some success with that fish.
Yeah. No, I mean, they're not really challenging in the sense of keeping. I think whenever you keep wild fish, there's going to be an additional challenge. Um, but you know, whenever you keep wild fish, there will probably be some type of challenge. But it's more the challenge in I think just trying to understand some of their basic habitat and biology. Clean water conditions, moderately hard water, a little alkaline pH will suit most species well. Um, some species are a little more delicate than others, but it's really species specific.
Mm-hmm. And then, not to diverge too far off of this topic, but then like the mollies, mollies fall under a different genus then?
Yeah,
Okay.
mollies are under the Passiliae genus. A lot of people think they should be split out back to Molinesnia,
Hmm.
um, because they're in the same genus as standard guppies,
Right. Right.
and they really don't interbreed well. But the fish don't gain as much interest, I think, as the cichlids. So the ichthyological taxonomist trend towards splitting has not really reached the mollies yet.
Gotcha.
Um, but they are Passiliad livebearers, which means just like Platies and swords, the female can get pregnant one time and give birth every 30 days for the next 7 months. That's what makes the platies and swordtails and all the Passiliad fish highly evolved animals. We think of them as simple, but just think of the evolutionary and habitat advantage of being able to um, further your species by just becoming inseminated one time.
So to the best.
And,
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, and that female during a storm could be washed into another pond over the eons and get isolated and form a whole new species.
To the best of your understanding, what is the chemical biological process going on where a female is able to hold on to a sperm for so long? Like how is she able to preserve that? And is she
Well,
keeping it in the male sperm form, or is she actually just fertilizing eggs, but then holding on to those in some manner that they're obviously not spoiling, and that she can choose to develop them when she sees fit. Like how is that? How is that developing inside?
Well, excuse me. Yeah, well, there's two different types of live bearing, right? There's some live bearers, and the Pasiliids are such. They're really egg-laying fish, but they're laying their eggs inside of the female's womb. There is some evidence, and there's more growing evidence that those developing embryos do get some nourishment from the mother in some way, but in mostly they are independently um, laid eggs developing inside of the mother, and they hatch out. Um, how what happens is the male sperm is in packets, and these sperm packets get stored inside of the uterus, and they can break open and inseminate the female over up to a 7 month period. And so they're giving birth every 30 days. So guppies, mollies, platies, swordtails. Now that's different than the goodeid live bearers or the half beaks or the anableps, four-eyed fish, which literally have umbilical cords.
Right, right.
So those are actually, nurturing their young, and they give birth to fewer fry, but they're really huge. They're
Mm-hmm.
large animals. Whereas, one of the records is a Hellerii swordtail gave birth to 172 fry once.
Wow.
I mean, that's just, because there's just so many eggs there and they can get a very large size. But they give birth to a lot because the fish are small. They do get eaten. A few survive in the wild, and they eventually grow up to be adults themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, it's crazy that depending on where the fish is and the particular fish itself, that the evolutionary path would be, instead of scattering eggs or putting them on a surface and guarding them, that it would just be internal prolonged gestation, I guess, and then to actually
Right.
birth live fish. Like it seems like it's just crazy how some fish take one path and this fish took a completely different path.
Correct.
And so right now we're
Absolutely
watching,
correct.
that was a video, or I guess we were going to watch a video of, the birthing process.
Correct. So you can see that they give birth to the fish. You can see one coming out of the womb there. Um, there's no parental care, of course, and some fish are more cannibalistic than others, right? Um, you might get a particular female swordtail who gets a tasting for her fry. What a lot of the professional breeders do when that happens, they will not work with that female anymore.
Mm.
You have other females who really kind of ignore their fry, so it's important to keep the female fed. Um, Usually, when you start to see a squaring off of the bottom of the female, generally a sign birth is imminent. That's an old sign that works with some fish, not with others. And usually want to isolate that fish in a heavily planted tank so the fry can actually be saved.
So other than being the extra work, if there's a female that wants to prey on her young, is it also they don't want to work with that female because that could be a behavior that gets passed along and they just want to stop?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, interesting.
And these are for people who work with more of the fancy varieties of swordtails. Like these new red, well, not new anymore, the red alphas. What you're seeing here is not a doctored photo. So if any of your viewers want to go on Google and type in red alpha swordtail, they'll see what I'm speaking about. These are really vibrant type of swordtails that are all the rage now for the past 10, 15 years.
Hmm.
Came out of Germany originally. Um,
Yeah, it's like
and you
outlined, and
can
the
see,
fins are a very bright red, but then the body,
yeah,
like the side body profile from this image, looks very black, very dark. A lot of contrast between the black and the red. Very cool fish.
right. And again, and this is a completely undoctored photo. So, if you type in red alpha swordtail, you'll see what some of these actually look like.
No, this is fun. I'm along for the ride watching the slides. And then what else would you like to touch on? What else is a good point to bring up on the swordtails?
Well, I think one of the problems is it's very hard to find swordtails now, right? Most of the big box stores, the Petco and the Petco and the PetSmarts, they focus more on platyfish and Variatus, which is uh, the Variatus platy is it's the fish you see up here in the right corner. It has a more elongated body than a regular maculatus type platy, but not as long as a standard swordtail. Again, most of them near in the pet shops are nearly all hybrid fish. The pet shops tend to focus on those types of platies. It's hard to find good swordtails unless you go to an independent store or if you go to a fish club. Most people have not seen what a really good swordtail looks like with a long type of sword. In the extreme would be the Montezuma swordtail,
Mm-hmm.
which unfortunately in the hobby, a lot of fish are being sold as Montezuma swordtails when they're really not. They're really Hellerii swordtails. Um, but again, so if you really want to work with swordtails, what you need is a somewhat larger tank. These fish can get a little big. The males do fight with each other. Once they start getting a sword, there's sort of an aggressive instinct that you even don't see with some of the platies. The Variatus platies you do. It really comes down to this northern mountain swordtails. And in Mexico is kind of a split ecology, right? You have this thing called the Trans Mexican Volcanic Belt that runs through the middle of the country. And that's the north of that. You get these, swordtails that tend to be a little more aggressive. You get the Montezumas. You get the Variatus platies. South of that, you get the Maculatus platies. And the ones in the north tend to have these very, dramatic swords. But I don't think most people have really seen what a good swordtail looks like.
Well,
So,
the image that
um,
you were just showing, I mean, to talk about a good sword, I mean, that fish is maybe 2 to 3 inches. Its body itself, and then once you factor in that sword coming down at a 45-degree angle, that thing is at least 2x the
right.
body size. It is. You would almost think that from an evolutionary standpoint that would somehow make it more susceptible to predation, which I guess the ladies like it, but it's like, man, you got this giant trail of a predator's
Well,
gonna
yeah, right. So there's a trade-off, right? It
right.
attracts females more to perpetuate your species. It does give you a level of speed. It does also even help the male to even swim backwards sometimes
Huh.
to inseminate a female. But it gets you so big that you're easy to be caught, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of evolutionary biologists feel the reason why the sword gets lost over time, and there's still a big debate on why that happens, is possibly because of the number of predators that are in the environment, right? You want to get a shorter body in order to survive. Um, Also, the thing is, remember, a smaller body makes it easier to just strike and dart and impregnate a female.
Mm-hmm.
The longer sword, is a little more effort. So sometimes those small sword genes can be perpetuated, and eventually, you get a swordless species. Sort of like a platyfish.
So you
So
do
there's, lots of theories about that.
so you do see the sneaker males then during a mating courtship between a
Yeah,
long sword male and a female that says, "Oh, I like that," and then all of a sudden sneaker male comes in and does his business.
right, right. And then you will see that with Zophophorus um, nigrensis, for example. Zophophorus nigrensis has four different types of males of different sizes and different colors. Um, Now they enjoy the same habitat as another species of swordtail. So how come they don't interbreed? What's real they found interesting about this fish is that its sword and its scales reflect UV light in a way that can only be picked up by the female.
Hmm.
So they're able to distinguish their species that way, and that adds a level of attraction. Um,
Crazy.
the other thing about these fish that are real interesting, and that has to do with this, which is the what was described in the early 70s as the leap fish phenomenon. If you have a Variatus platy or a Montezuma swordtail, any of the more wild types fish, you will see this behavior. But you'll see it even in a tank of fancy swordtails, koi swordtails, or whatever, what happens is, and I'm just showing a picture right now to you, Randy. The Variatus platy is a fish where the males are more colorful than the females. It's one of the few, one of the few species within the Zophophorus genus, which is about 20, 22 species, where the males are really the colorful ones. But what happens, you find out, is that many males will stealth themselves as females before their bodies get big enough to turn into males. So they are males, but they're stealthing themselves. They'll come with a gravid spot. This fish on the left that I'm showing Randy right now is actually a male fish. This is what this fish looked like a month later.
Oh wow, all
And
colored up and
what
beautiful. Yeah.
all colored, it looks just like a male Variatus, and now they're sparring with each other. But before, that fish could not do that. It was not ready to take on that fish.
Hmm.
So that's called the leap fish phenomenon. I can't tell you how many times people have emailed me and say, Ted, I've bought a bunch of Montezuma swordtails. They're all females. And I'm like, wait, because in an aquarium situation, you could wait almost 2 years before their maleness sort of appears. Now, back in the old days, they used to say that swordtails change sexes. They really don't change sex in the sense that they're really more late developing males and early developing males.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see that in your aquarium, especially if it's a small aquarium. Um,
Is that the same behavior as what we see with epistogrammas? So a lot of times when you're, in a retail store setting, when somebody specifically requests a male and a female, it's usually very easy to find that one distinctive male in a group. But then that female tends to be a bit more difficult because of the sneaker male kind of effect. Is that kind of the same thing in practice here?
well, no, because um, the males don't become, in terms of the leap fish phenomenon, the males don't become sneaker males. They actually look like females.
Hmm.
So they can't breed with the existing males. There
Right.
are some species of swordtails, like the nigrenses, which do develop sneaker males as well as full-size males, and they will breed with the females. So there are some species that do that, but most of the
Oh,
species
okay.
don't.
Okay, I see
Yeah.
what you're saying.
So
Gotcha.
this is more of leaping, going from looking like a female to a male very quickly
Gotcha.
once your body size is actually large enough. And it's basically a way, because I can tell you that I've had a 90-gallon tank, which is a large tank, fully planted with just Variatus platies. I could only put one male in that tank. If I put any other male in that tank, he would kill him.
Hmm.
So they get very, very aggressive, and swordtails will too. They will get very, very aggressive. So one way to counter that aggression is to get your body size big enough, stealth yourself as a male, don't let out the pheromones, and then turn into a male within like a couple of weeks, and then you'll be able to take on that other fish.
Yeah,
And
and
that's called the leap fish phenomenon.
And that's just one of those kind of concepts when we think about species in general. Like you would associate that aggression so much with cichlids in general, but when it comes to like a live bearer, most people I would say, oh no, live bearers are super peaceful. But your experience and the experience of others that know these fish know that that's counter.
Well, yeah, I mean it's more interspecies specific aggression
Hmm.
rather than intraspecific, right? Um, So whereas the cichlids will take on other fish to
Hmm.
guard their eggs and stuff like that, and other species and other animals, this is more competition among the males.
Gotcha. And so now we're seeing a slide of sex determination.
Yeah, so one of the things that makes the simple platyfish so unique, with most fish, you have, like humans, you have X and Y chromosomes to determine your sex, right? If you're an XX, you're a female. If you're an XY, you're a male. But with platies, you can get three different types of females and two different kinds of males because they have X, Y, and W. So you have so it's a weird concept to think, well, you're either male or female. Well, no, with the platies, you're more fluid, which is a concept we all know now in our culture.
So what is
And where
so what's
you
the?
have
I'm sorry.
no, no, no. It's just saying that you have genetically, you have WY, WX, and XX. They're all female. but there are three different kinds of females. And with males, you have XY or YY,
So
and
let's develop that with the
two
males.
different
So
kinds of males.
so
And
what's a YY
mhm.
male? Like how would you best describe the difference between an XY male and a YY male?
Well,
Or is it just at that chromosome level? Like when you actually.
yeah, how this all came about is when they're very hard to work with platies and swordtails to fix a color pattern or to fix a finnage pattern. And what they find is that um, depending on the type, which of the three types of females and two types of males you cross, that color pattern might not get fixed or not, right? So, in the fish business, it's important that if I want to get a red platy with an orange dorsal, I want it always to produce that fish. And platies, it's very hard for that to happen because there's so much genetic variability. Um, so often we know that there's certain color and shape and pigment and finnage characteristics associated with the type of male or female that you are. Sometimes, if you'll cross a certain phenotype, male and female, you may get all females.
Hmm.
So they're very hard fish to work with. Much harder to work with than fancy guppies in terms of you getting certain uh, color patterns, right? Um, And people have been working on these fish for colors ever since they found out that platies and swordtails can interbreed in the early part of the 20th century. So, there have been when the hobby first really took off, it used to be called the toy fish craze back in the 1920s. The platies, swordtails, and the mollies, they were like the fish. There was always new color varieties coming out all the time. Everyone was trying to make their own color variety. It wasn't really until the 1950s we were able to get a solid color fish. Before then, it was always multicolored fish because of these genetic variabilities that make it really hard to fix a certain pattern.
And then in your personal experience breeding these fish, are you just breeding to maintain healthy stock, or if you would see a male, or a female developing a certain physical trait that you really liked, how much would you try to focus on that? On the fact that there is that extra chromosome element that would make fixing that much more difficult, or is that just something that in your personal experience you haven't concerned yourself too much with that?
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert platy and swordtail breeder. The ones that are really know their genetics, right?
Mm.
They know what the color red does. For example, the red alpha, which we spoke about before. You know, you can't breed two red alphas together to get a red alpha. You have to breed a red alpha to a regular red swordtail to get the red alpha type of effect. That strain hasn't been fixed yet. So it really depends upon the breeders. The people who do this really, and but I don't want to discourage people here. Even at home, you can try crossing a couple of fish, different platies to see what you get. The problem is that when you get a female platy or swordtail, they're all going to be they're already going to be uh, impregnated. So trying to get a virgin female to kind of work with is what you really want to shoot for. So, if you find a strain that you like and you say, I want to try to cross this red fish with this striped fish, let that red fish, you know, give birth, try to isolate the females as soon as you see them, and then work with those fish.
For basically like a seventh month kind of reproductive quarantine, right?
Well, no, I mean, well, either that or just take the first batch that she lays and work with those fish.
Hmm, okay.
Because they'll be, ready. If you feed them well with a lot of live or frozen foods, they'll be ready to spawn in like 3 months.
Or assuming that she wasn't mixed with a different variety before you came into possession.
Right,
Okay.
which is why, looking to find people who really breed these fish well.
Mm-hmm.
Aquabid is one site online that can ship you fish from breeders, and there are breeders who sell their fish online, and that's a way to guarantee, I think, to get a better stock. The one thing when you work with these fish, if you do make a crossing, you have to be careful with is the spotted pattern because a lot of these fish, like for example the wagtail platy, which is a common type of platy, or a wagtail swordtail. If you cross a fish that has these big black markings, like a totally black tail or a black dorsal, with a swordtail or pie that does not have those, um, a lot of those fish might develop a cancer. In other words, they don't have the regulatory gene to keep that black from spreading over the whole body.
Huh.
And this is why these fish became so popular back in the 30s as the first animal model for cancer, to prove that cancer can be inherited. Most of us think cancer is just something you get because of your diet or of your smoking. But in reality, you can inherit a cancer not because, oh, I got it from my uncle or or it carried down from my father, but it's the combination of two genotypes or phenotypes coming together, right? So, a platy that does not have any black markings on its body has no regulatory gene for that. So when it crosses with a platy or a swordtail that does have black finnage, some of those offspring will get the black markings, but not get the regulatory gene,
Huh.
right? Because its mother did not have that. And that will then cover the whole body, just like a melanoma cancer.
Interesting.
So, it's an interesting model about, and it applies to all animals, right? That sometimes disease happens not because you got it from one of your parents, but because the cross of your two parents, one of them did not carry over a certain gene to stop the proliferation of a certain trait.
And that black spotting slash dusting that we're seeing right now on this platy, I've seen that in other fish in a retail store setting. Is that only a true statement when it comes to the platy and that kind of marking that we see in another fish, like an angelfish, for example, that isn't indicative of the regulatory ability
The-
to regulate
yeah,
that?
don't know if you crossed a gold angel with a I mean, usually when you cross a gold angel with a standard striped angel, you don't have this type of issue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is really more of a case of where you have a lot of black that's on a fish that really shouldn't be there.
Interesting.
For example, the wagtail platy was created by the cross of a wild platy with a comet pattern. That's a two-bar black pattern on its tail or caudal fin, with a standard ghost or gold platy, which was in the pet shop trade. And what surprised everyone, what popped out was this pattern called the wagtail platy. And it's hard to find good wagtail platies now. But if you do, they're really wonderful fish if you can find some good ones. And so what happened was this, it created more black, but then it actually stopped. Again, these fishes' genetics are really complex and unpredictable, which makes them fun to work with and makes them frustrating to work with too.
It sounds like you are fairly accepting of the designer platy swordtails as well as having a passion for the naturally occurring ones. Is that a
Of
true
course,
statement?
yeah.
Okay.
Look, oh yeah, well, yeah, I'm involved in a lot of fish clubs, and I always have to laugh when their Breeders' Award program says, we will accept no hybrid fish into our Breeders' Award program. And I have to laugh because the hobby was built on hybrid fish.
Mm-hmm.
The hobby was built on every angelfish you buy in the store, if it doesn't say wild, is a
Oh
hybrid.
yeah.
Every zebra cichlid you buy, an African cichlid, is probably a hybrid.
Yeah. Discus.
Most of the rainbow fish you're buying are hybrids. The tiger barbs you buy are hybrids, and not hybrids recently. This is just done from fish farming over the past 150 years, you know, 120 years. So the hobby is built on these. I see nothing wrong there. What bothers me is when people put out these fish and call them by a species. So, and the pet shops do this. You'll see a platy or swordtail, they'll give it a scientific name. A pet shop Platy swordtail is just Zophophorus species.
Right.
It's a hybrid to get those colors. So I really wish BAP programs would give people points for both the retail versions of these fish as well as the wild versions, so we can get some of the wild types into the hobby. And I think we don't have a lot of the wild types into the hobby because people work with the pet shop types and they move on to another kind of fish.
I like that you have an appreciation for both. I really do. I think that,
Yeah.
if you never know when somebody has your level of knowledge on a specific genus of fish, they can tend to be purists. And it's very nice to hear that you do have the appreciation for the fish that, get people into the hobby. Like, I doubt you're going to get somebody into the hobby with the most naturally occurring form of a guppy versus, some of these really beautiful colored, farm bred fish.
Right.
And now we're looking at three very long fin. What are those guys in a critter catcher? It looks like, or a specimen
Yeah,
container.
this is from the United States premier um, um, swordtail fancy swordtail breeder, which is Carl Trochu in miamiswordtails.com. Another good source to get your fish, and he works with all these fancy fish, usually with a lot of high fins. And if you go to his website, Miami Swordtails, you can see some of his videos. Carl and I are just watching one now to give you an example. This is another trait that was put on these fish, which is this amazing high fin here that they put on some of these animals. Um, you can see they put it on a Montezuma swordtail too.
Wow.
So that's their finnage color. There's a lot of varieties, and then you can specialize in any of the 22 species that are out there too, right? So if you want a more wild type, I find the wild type fish behavior is a lot more interesting, um, because they haven't been raised on a fish farm, which means their behavior has been unnaturally selected to be a certain way. The wild type fish, they generally show some, interesting social behavior and a pecking order that you can appreciate, even in like a small aquarium. You get some of the platies, a colony can, in a 10-gallon tank, a species tank, you can really enjoy some of the uniqueness of those species
So then,
very, very easily.
in your experience, then wild versus domestic slash designer strains of these fish, they're depending on who you talk to, the prevailing thoughts are, oh, wilds are way more hardy than the domestic ones. The domestic ones are so line bred that they're so fragile, and you hear the exact opposite of, oh no, wilds, they fall apart once they get into a home aquarium, and the domestic ones are the ones that you want to stay with. I mean, what has just been your experience on that, or is it just hit or miss, and it
Well,
just depends on the
I mean,
individual species?
the it depends. Really, you can put the fish into I think four different clusters. You have wild caught fish, so they come into the retailer from the wild. Those fish, unfortunately, when they're shipped, they usually stop feeding them right, so they don't soil themselves and pollute the bags that they're in. Trouble is when that happens, that proliferates any intestinal worms the fish have. Instead of those worms being pushed out through diet and digestion, they tend to proliferate. Those fish can often come in weak. But if you know people who know how to get a good supplier of and who ships quickly, like we have a shop here in New Jersey called Adams Pet Safari in Chester. He imports most of his fish, picks them up at the airport, treats them well. Um, but those fish are used to certain water conditions. Then you have fish that are tank raised, right? Hobbyists are raising wild type fish. These are the fish you see in fish clubs and fish club auctions. And those fish will adjust to your water conditions just fine because they've been raised that way. Then you have pet shop fish that come from fish farms, right? And fish farm fish have also, generally, depending upon the retailer, they have to be shipped. Some retailers know how to take care of their fish and some don't. Um, if they're bred from Florida, they're used to hard water conditions. If they come from Singapore, sometimes they're used to more neutral or acidic conditions. Um, So it really depends on the source where your fish come from rather than a wild versus fancy.
Hmm.
Some of the fancy guppies, and again, you look at, for example, how about a fish room that focuses on fancy guppies? Well, often in the fancy guppy hobby, these fish are kept in mostly sterile conditions. There's not even a plant in some of these tanks, right? Any little bit of bacteria, the fish's fins go bad. Um, Keeping those fish and buying them and putting them in your home aquarium, it can be a gamble, right? Because they're used to such sterile conditions. I'm not a big fan of keeping a tank perfectly clean, to be honest with you. I think when I put my fish outside in the summer, they get the water changed around Memorial Day, and that's it. They're out there all summer until around October 1st with no water changes. The rain might top them off. I might top them off with water from my tap, but that's it. I think sometimes if you keep these real sterile laboratory conditions, your fish just don't get hardy enough, you know. But that's just my theory.
No, that makes really. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, definitely. Kind of
Now,
that.
that doesn't mean you shouldn't change water. You should do
Yeah,
as
for sure,
large
for
volume of
sure.
water changes as frequently as you can. And now that we're all stuck at home, you guys have no excuse to not change your water a lot.
There should be so
Um,
much fish tank maintenance going on right now that just all across the
yeah,
country that the fish have never been happier in the home setting right now. And actually
right.
yesterday I did a my fish room has an auto water change system with overflow, but my 75-gallon display tank I actually did a nice large water change on it because I'm working from home and it's kind of quarantine day.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, no, that's yeah, and but I think where it gets bad is when like you see some of these tanks that are all bare bottom tank, or they vacuum their gravel completely. And I think what we're learning more, especially we're all using a lot of the people in the hobby, the breeders are using matin filters now. Um, and the way a matin filter works, it's a piece of Porex foam that is put in the corner or you know on one side of the tank with water running through it. The key is never to clean that filter because in nature, Mother Nature doesn't clean the side of a stream or a pond. You never clean that filter because different bacteria, not only the biological bacteria we are familiar with, but things like arc reactions, enzymes, microorganisms, they start to invade that foam. And that's when a tank really gets in balance. I always talk about we've all had the experience in our fish rooms where we've had a tank where we forgot about the filter has been off. We left a fish in there. We didn't feed it. We come back a few months later and there it is in the tank swimming fine and there's no ammonia levels. It's because there's been a biological bacteria, enzymes, arc reactions, and other things that have occurred, a biofilm, a microfauna in that tank that has cleaned that tank. And that's what happens when you set up your tub ponds outside early. And that's what happens in your home aquarium too. I'm not saying don't clean your tank and you shouldn't vacuum some of the mulm up, but if you're keeping live plants, that mulm that's in your gravel, that's creating soil conditions that your plants need.
Hmm.
So you sometimes can clean too much. It's sort of like how they say don't use hand sanitizers all the time because you start to not be able to react to certain bacteria in your environment. We get too clean. I
Yep.
mean, now with COVID-19, we all have to be extra clean because we have no immunity defense. But, there is something to say about trying to
Yeah.
keep things a little more natural.
So the way the Matin filter works, just to talk this out loud and to get your opinion, then. So Matin filter is going to work with the water flowing through the foam, and it's being expelled back out the other side through an uplift tube, right, with an outlet. And then,
Either right, so either an uplift tube or what I do, I'll put an internal power filter like a
mm,
little Whisper 10 internal on the other side of the foam.
hmm.
And I'll sometimes just use that, or you can use an air stone.
And where I'm going with this then is the traditional sponge filter that basically pushes water through an uplift tube, right? So it's running down your airline tubing into kind of a center chamber, whether you let it just bubble into the center chamber and back up the uplift tube or through an air stone. Do you then take the same matte and filter, don't clean it principle and apply that to the foam of a traditional sponge filter? Or is it the difference in how the water flows where, matte and filter, yeah, no, you won't need to clean that one, but Ted's opinion is that you should still clean the traditional round sponge filter.
Yeah, I'm not, it all depends. If your water is rock hard and really hard, sometimes you have to clean that filter just because it becomes like cement.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my friends down in the Florida farms do that. But I am now also of the opinion not to really clean that filter.
You're
My
making me
friend Mike
feel
Hill,
real good right now because I cannot
no,
stand maintaining my sponge filters.
yeah,
So I'm happy to hear you
I,
say that.
I think what happens is what we're realizing now is even a sponge filter is not enough to sometimes create what a matte filter can do. What a that the large surface area of a matte filter, if you leave it there over many months, will create a biofilm and microfauna that will really create tremendous water quality. But for me, creates a feeding zone, right? If you've ever seen little fry of your fish picking at your sponge filter,
Yep.
well, imagine a whole matin filter of that. So that's been a real key of how I've found baby fish. For example, I just found some weird mascara barbs on the other side of my matin filter the other day because I moved a piece of hornwort plant over there. There was some eggs on it. I haven't been feeding these things, and they're pretty good size now. They've been picking at the microorganisms on the matin filter.
Mm-hmm.
So on the sponge filter, that happens too. What my friend Mike Helwig, who I think is arguably the best breeder of fish in the United States, down in St. Louis, does. He also wrote the seminal book, How to Culture Live Foods. Doesn't do YouTube, so a lot of the new hobbyists don't know who
Yeah.
he is.
Yeah.
But fortunately, most of the real experienced hobbyists are older and they don't do YouTube. And he says when he has to go on vacation, if he has to go away, he will squeeze out the sponge filter to feed his baby fish because there's all types of microorganisms in there. So yeah, I'm moving away from cleaning my sponge filters now and just trying to make sure that there is enough flow in there so the water flows through.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that would be the one determining
That's all the
factor
learnings
is,
from the matin filter. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
is with not cleaning the sponge filter. And I've got soft water, so I don't have to deal with the calcium buildup like maybe somebody in Florida would. But am I impacting my water flow around in the aquarium? And then I guess if I'm not getting the water flow through the sponge filter, is the bacteria in there then dying off because it's being clogged, or is there still enough just inherent flow and circulation that that's not even a concern? And
Oh
it's
no, yeah, that's always been a concern for us. But if you look at how the matin filters work, that hypothesis seems to not be true
hmm.
because you would think that other processes take over, right? Um,
Well, water
that
finds a
that
way.
that
Like water finds a way through something, unless it's a completely solid surface. Water
right,
will find a way. I've
right.
I've learned that with
So
a fish room for sure.
right. And one of the things about the matin filters is that the water has to go through that area. It has to go through that sponge to get out. Whereas
Hmm.
with a sponge filter, the water goes up through a tube. So sometimes, depending on the design of the sponge filter, you don't know if the water is coming through that sponge.
Yeah,
So that's why some people are using matin filters and creating their
yeah.
own sponges now too. They're doing away with the little center. They're just putting tubes directly through a sponge and having the water come through there because they know it's coming through the sponge. But there's a lot more reactions going on both in your pond or in your tub pond and in your mat filter and your filters than we realize. I think a mistake a lot of hobbyists make is when they use an overhanging power filter and they'll clean the filter, which is fine, but they'll clean that sponge that's
Hmm.
inside the filter
Yeah.
or that
Bio
biological
rings
media.
or yep.
Don't do it. And now I'm saying, I used to rinse it out like probably you did, Randy, in the water that I'm changing out. I would give it a rinse in there. I didn't want to put it under the tap water that has chlorine. I'm not even doing that now. I'm just keeping it in that filter. I don't want to touch that thing. I want that is your life force in there. So I'm just leaving it there, and I will replace the filter pad. I'll put some carbon in. Carbon is a good thing to use, especially when you introduce new fish. But I'll leave that biological media alone now.
Good stuff. And yeah, we're looking at some Swiss tropicals pictures. And actually, in my fish room, I had ordered a good number of matte and filters from Swiss tropicals. Quality.
Yeah.
Stephen Tanner's uplift tubes are fantastic, air-driven uplift tubes. Like he does
Yes.
these little micro holes that you've got to have a real good DIY setup at home to kind of replicate what he does with those uplift tubes.
Yeah, you do.
I've gone away from them just to using sponge filters because I found that when I was working with some guppies that I would always see like, man, this tank looks a little light on guppies, and sure enough they would swim into the uplift tube, go back the other side, and would eventually just
Oh, okay.
succumb. Yeah,
Well,
and so I could see like
well,
people
so
with bigger fish that not being as much of a concern, but for me, I was like,
yeah,
I'll just run sponge filters, and so I pulled them out.
yeah. So what I did, I took the tubes from the matte filter and actually took a knife and cut a little slit right down the top of the matte filter. I put the tubes inside the matte filter.
So do I. Yeah, I did. So
Yeah,
the venerable Matten filter, that second picture in the middle, that's exactly what I
yeah.
did. And I have a cut on my finger from a brand new utility blade
Oh,
to
wow, wow.
to.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh man, that thing will
yeah.
slice through your finger like a knife through hot or a hot
Wow.
knife through butter.
Well, I've been using those, $10, $15 Whisper internal power filters and putting them just on the other side of the matte filter.
So maybe
Um,
more
instead,
flow. Yeah,
well, it's not just more flow, but if I have to raise the heat to breed fish, an internal power filter is going to raise it up about 4 degrees anyway. So I get a little extra heat, so my heater doesn't work as much, or my heater in the room doesn't work as much. And then if I need to put carbon in the tank for some reason, I can easily put in carbon, right? Regular matte and filter, you can't really do that. So that's what I've been doing. Sometimes I've been pushing the matte and filter all the way over to one side and putting the filter on that other side, so I can have an aquascape tank. So that's kind of, it's a lot of stuff to plug in versus just having a bunch of tubing.
yeah.
But I don't heat I heat my whole fish room to a comfortable level for me, and then I have to bring up the heat for certain tanks for other things. But great thing about platies and swordtails, you really don't need a lot of high heat for them,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
You can do almost ambient temperatures.
yeah. Well, Ted, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've taken up, I think well more than the kind of the allotted time that I should
Yes,
for
we
a
went.
guest.
We actually went on many
We
tangents.
did,
Sorry
we
about
did.
that,
No,
Randy.
no, that's a. This is what I love about this podcast is that it's not like we kind of have like a general idea of what I would like the guests to talk about that they specialize in, but we're gonna go down tangents and we're gonna go on we're just gonna have two fish nerds having a conversation, and
Right, right.
I enjoy it. I think the people that listen to this podcast enjoy it, and Ted, clearly you are, just like our good friend Joe Ferdenzi, like you are somebody that has got so much experience and so much knowledge in this hobby that if technical difficulties aside, which Ted and I we had a bit of a struggle to make this thing happen,
Oh yeah.
but I would love to have you on again in the future to talk about maybe go more in depth on the pond, pond season, or one of your other many specialty
History of the
areas.
hobby,
Oh,
even. Yeah.
history of the hobby. Yeah, that would. You know
Yeah.
what? we need to try to get Joe. Let's get Joe on it as well, and I'll have
My
you and
old friend,
Joe.
my old friend and mentor, Joe Fredenzi. I have visited Joe's basement, which is the mecca of aquarium history. He has an entire display room of ancient tanks and artifacts that's truly amazing.
I have been lucky enough. I've had dinner at with Joe and Anita, and I recorded
Yeah.
my second interview with him down in that basement, and it was such an awesome experience because that was only like the second legit fish room that I had been in since getting back into the hobby, and to have it to be Joe's fish room is just phenomenal. And Joe helped line up an interview with Rosario Lacorte at the 2018 Aquatic Experience for me, and that was an awesome experience. Um, but yeah, Ted, you are equally as awesome, my man. So I have appreciated this conversation so much, and if you'll come back on in the future, man, I would love to have you.
Sure. Anytime, Randy. It was
And
very good speaking with you today.
And to leave the folks, so I will leave the link to the pawn book that's on Amazon. Your other Livebearer book, is that also available for purchase? Am I going to be able to link that one for people?
Yeah, that's available now from Animal Planet and
Okay.
Tropical Fish Hobbyist. The Live Bear book I think is only an ebook now.
Okay. No problem.
But you can get hard copies, I think, through secondary sources.
So I
And
will
that's the Aquarium Care of Live Bearers. That's from 2008.
so I will link those two books in the show notes. Is there anything else, any social media presence, anything else you want me to link to so people
No,
can?
just well, I was supposed to give my talk on container ponds for aquarium hobbyists on March 18th down in the St. Louis Aquarium Society. I'm sorry, the Missouri Area Aquarium Society, which is Gary Lang and Mike Helwig's club.
Mm-hmm.
That got canceled because of COVID-19. Supposed to give the same talk April 3rd at my club, got canceled. And also at the Northeast Council of Aquarium Society convention, which is open to everyone, on April 18th, also got canceled. So, in lieu of this, I'm going to be doing a public broadcast, a webinar of it's called Take It Outside, container ponds for aquarium hobbyists and water gardeners on Friday, April 3rd at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on YouTube. And if you go to the Tub Pond Handbook YouTube channel, or you can look for the event on Facebook, you can get all the information. You just go right on YouTube and you can sit through the seminar. And it'll be a webinar rather than, we'll have your whole screen will be the actual PowerPoint presentation, and I'll be narrating it. And we have people from all around the world going to be attending it as we're all stuck inside. So the Fish Club, the business of Fish Club, Fishy Fellowship continues. It's just going to continue online for a while. So I hope all of your listeners, if they're interested, they're more than welcome to come.
Awesome. And then if they miss the live stream portion of that, is it still going to be available just in a recorded fashion available on the YouTube channel for people to go back and watch it in the future?
Yeah,
Awesome.
I'm I'm thinking, I generally don't put my presentations on YouTube because, and I don't let people film it either because I want people to come out to live fish clubs.
Hmm.
So but I probably will keep it up for people who missed it for like about 24 hours or so.
Okay, that's fair. That's very fair. All right, Ted. Well, thank you so much, sir. Again, I cannot thank you enough for coming on. I appreciate you
Oh, it's my
sacrificing so
pleasure,
much
Randy.
time, and it's been a great talk. And I mean, this happens every single episode, but especially just talking with you, hearing your passion for swordtails and platies, and just knowing that there's so much more to them than just what we think we know based on strolling into any big box store and seeing these fish, but knowing that there's just so much more to them. Thank you so much again, Ted, for sharing.
Oh, well, thank you, Randy. Thanks for having me, and I hope you and your family stay healthy.